Hey everyone, how's it going? I hope you're all doing great and following the 3H's of the channel. I also hope that you're having a good Christmas or whatever you choose to celebrate. And in this video, it's going to be about the Carolinas. So if that sounds like something you're interested in, pull up a stump with me, fill up those stockings, and let's get into it. Thank you for watching. I live in North Carolina and in a pretty rural area, and I had a run-in with one of these things that you guys now call crawlers. While making a late trip to the store, I heard a strange howl or screech. I can't really pinpoint which one it was. I've never heard this before or since. Immediately after, I heard something ripping something apart. We have a lot of coyotes around here, so I thought that they were doing something to a smaller animal, so I took my pistol with me. After riding along the back road a mile or so, my front tire gives out, like from full to just nothing in the span of 3 seconds. I slowly inched to the nearest gas station, not stopping on a dark-ass back road. I phoned my family, and they helped me with getting a spare on. On the ride back, I'm driving ahead of my brother, who owns a big truck with ditch lights that can light stuff up like crazy. While on the same back road, my brother hits the ditch lights to keep the deer away. We get back home, and he comes running at me. Did you see that? Did you see that? I just saw effing Nosferatu out there. I try to calm him down a bit, but he rushes me inside with him. My parents are on the front porch, talking with some visiting family, so I go let my dog out. I notice some red orbs out in the woods. It's like a car's brake light, but it's super dim. After talking to him, he told me that the creature looked directly at him, and it was like a grayish white. It was crouched in a stance that made no sense, and it had no nose. It looked super skinny and almost skeletal-like, and that was our only run-in with this. We've never seen it before or after that. It's pretty well known among a very small and guarded group that so-called ghouls live underground and use a labyrinth system of tunnels developed over thousands of years to circumnavigate the entire globe. A few weeks ago, I remember reading about an individual who saw the same creature dart under a street lamp and come down an embankment, where it paused to briefly look into a house through an open window before disappearing into a hole in an adjacent vacant lot. In 2002, I too caught a glimpse of a similar creature in rural South Carolina while I was on a solo kayak trip in an isolated tributary of a large river that nearly spans the entire state. As I was negotiating a small bend in the river, I spotted furtive movements on the reed-shrouded bank about 30 yards ahead of me. I paused there and heaved onto the sandy outcrop. As I looked more closely at the location of the movement, I clearly saw a figure approximately the size of a medium-sized dog crouching on its hind legs. Its body was grayish in tone, and it seemed nearly hairless. It was looking south, and in that position, I was able to see its head in profile. The cranium was oddly elongated, with a sloping forehead. The chin protruded dramatically and curved upward to meet the upper lip. Its eyes seemed to be unblinking and black. Not a moment later, it slipped almost silently head first into the water. I waited in my spot for some time, honestly, too scared to advance down the river, but ultimately, I had no choice. After regaining my composure and formulating in my head how exactly I could use my paddle as a weapon, I slowly pushed off and allowed my kayak to drift slowly down to the spot where I saw the creature. The only evidence of it even being there was a semicircular depression in the reeds. I surmised that it had been crouching there for a considerable amount of time, probably hunting prey. I spent the rest of a long day on that tributary, but I never saw the creature again. So in October of 2015, I was a US Marine fresh out of boot camp. In the Marines, every boot goes to a place called MCT, Marine Combat Training, after boot camp to learn basically how to kill things. Infantry Marines stay for 3 months, but POGs, like myself, are only there for 1. East Coast Marines go to a place in North Carolina called Camp Geiger. So by the time of all this, I was almost done with MCT. We were at this small base out in the middle of the woods for the last part of our training. People had been spreading rumors about a ghost named Molly that would walk by the front gate between 3 and 4 a.m. It's supposedly a little girl. One night, my buddy had ammo watch. Some of us were put on different guard shifts every night: armory watch, ammo watch, gate guard, etc. So each sentry was given a radio to check in with the sergeant on duty every hour and to call in case anything happens. Each radio is on the same channel so you can hear the other sentries when they talk. Ammo watch was this little shed that had all the ammo in it. Obviously, it's out in the woods. There's just 2 of them, far away from the gate and everything else. It's 3:30 or so in the morning. Over the radio, we hear, "E5, come in. This is gate guard. Over." And the sergeant replies, "This is E5. Send it. Over." The gate guard replies, "There's something in the woods. Over." "Well, what the hell is it?" "It's probably an animal, you pussy." Over. "Negative, Sergeant. I think it's a person." "Stand by. It's probably MARSOC. I'm coming over. Out." MARSOC is like Marine Special Forces who train over there sometimes. Sometimes they show up to mess with us, beyond operator. The next morning, my buddy tells me about what he had heard on the radio. Him and the guy he was with thought it was Molly. I'm already a little interested in the paranormal, so I say, let's go talk to the guy about it. The guy tells us that he swears it was a little girl standing out there in the woods. The sergeant went out and couldn't find anyone. Sergeant didn't think that MARSOC was out there training either during that time. He says that this isn't the first time this has happened. He said it's probably Molly. The sergeant also mentioned that Molly was a thing even when he was at MCT, but he thought it was a rumor until he became a combat instructor and some of the other instructors said they saw her. Other weird stuff would also happen there every once in a while. He just stayed out there with this dude for the rest of his shift because all 3 of them were freaked out, including the sergeant. Anywho, a few days pass. There's more training and more exercises. The hurricane comes. This is already shitty enough here, so it just gets worse. It's just rain and storms non-stop. The whole place is basically flooded. We finally get to the last exercise, called BSRE, and I don't remember what that stands for. It's basically a 3-day-long simulated battle between each of the platoons. At least that's how my cycle did it. My cycle was bigger than the normal ones, just more Marines to train for some reason. There's a big fake camp that's supposed to be like one that would be in Iraq, right inside the base. During the op, one platoon had to defend it each day. There were these 4, at least I think there were, long shitty huts that were in there that they had us sleep in. They said normally there's one they don't use, but since our cycle was bigger, they said they had to put us in there. And I thought, well, alright then. So there's sticks and spiders and mud everywhere. They had us sleep on the concrete ground. It's still pouring rain. And this is one of the moments where I'm thinking, why did I sign up for this? Anyways, I'm sleeping, or at least trying to. A buddy, a different one from before, but my closest friend by far, is standing watch. He shines the flashlight in my face, and I think, man, F you. It wakes me up, but he's freaked out. I say, what is it? He says that there's a little kid out there, but it wasn't a girl, it was a boy. I roll over, tell him to F off, and assume that he was messing with me. He says he's dead serious. I look at him again, and I saw by the way he was staring at me, and by the way he sounded, that he was genuinely scared. So I say, okay, fine. I get up. It's still storming out. I looked outside, and I saw a lightning flash, and I felt kind of freaked out. There was just a weird, creepy vibe in the air. Everyone is passed out. I hear my buddy make the weirdest sound ever, a sound of pure fear. I look over, shining the flashlight at the ground. I see tiny wet footprints. My heart drops into my stomach. It looks like this little boy walked perfectly around him. I audibly say, "Oh my God." He is really freaked out. I'm trying to laugh it off, just saying that he's about to shit himself, isn't he? Trying to tell him to relax. I didn't even bother asking any of the exterior guards if they saw anything. I just stay up with him, just talking the rest of his shift about anything other than what we saw, trying to get our minds off how creepy the atmosphere is and how freaked out we were. It works. He gets relieved, and we both go back to sleep. We don't even tell his relief about it. The next day, it's finally stopped raining. We don't tell anyone. We don't want to freak anyone out. No one believes us, and we didn't want to spread more rumors. We now say that we regret how freaked out we were, and we wished that we went after it. But in our heads, we both knew that we were terrified. The day goes by, typical Marine Corps BS, stand by to stand by and all that. The next night is 12 of us volunteered to go to our motivated sergeant, a different one from before. We'll call him Sergeant Smith, to go recon out in the woods all night since the storm had passed. The woods in this part of North Carolina were all pine trees, mud, and swamp. We just patrolled around the perimeter of the woods for maybe 2.5 hours, and then we get out deep into the woods. We set up a place to chill out on higher ground where it wasn't as wet and muddy. Sergeant Smith tells us his life story and stories about when he saw combat. We all get into a really deep talk about life and such. By this point, we've completely forgotten about the previous night. Hours pass. People start drifting off. Sergeant Smith tells us to go to sleep, and he'll take watch. And the fact that he took first watch made me love him even more. Before I pass out, I tell Sergeant Smith that I'm going to take a piss. I'm good to go. I walk down this hill into kind of this thick brush area. It's too dark to really see anything. I step into what is the beginning of a swamp. Only my foot gets soaked, and I think, shit. I take a few steps back, unbutton my trousers, and start to do my business. I hear what sounds like somebody walking through the water in front of me. Big sticks are snapping, like it's something huge. It's still dark as hell out, but I can make out something white, like a baggy white dress or something. But I really couldn't tell. I'm getting chills just typing all this out. I cancel going to the bathroom. Honestly, my first thought was that a combat instructor had heard us and dressed up like a terrorist in one of those white robes to come ambush us. I run up the hill and tell Sergeant Smith we're about to get ambushed. He says we're on a ceasefire for the night because of the hurricane. He asks me what I saw. I tell him it was this white figure. He tells everyone to wake up, we're leaving. I start to realize what I might have seen. I ask him. He tells me not to worry about it, just to get my stuff and get ready to leave. We hike off, and I ask him again. He tells me quietly that if we stay any longer, we're going to start to hear screaming coming from deeper in the woods. My heart sinks. I'm terrified. I tell him what happened the previous night. He gets quiet. He says they normally don't put Marines in there because of that reason. They call the ghost that I saw the lady in white. Apparently way back in the 20s or 30s, there was a schoolhouse out in the woods that burned down and killed a whole bunch of kids and the teacher. I'm speechless. I just want to get the hell out of there. The next day, I had to write paperwork about what I saw just to confirm that it wasn't a person who was trespassing on government property. The place is called Camp Devil Dog, and I think it's cursed. My theory is that some of the combat instructors used a Ouija board or something to make the spirit stronger, but I don't know. I don't know anything about this. But that place is scary as all hell. So before I start this story, I would just like to tell you and warn you, I guess, that there's not that much of an ending. My grandpa doesn't really have any idea what happened. So I'll just tell it how he told it to me. Grandpa and his family grew up dirt poor. In fact, everyone in his hometown was. But Grandpa was a little better off than most. He was lucky enough to own a horse. His name was Red, and Grandpa used to take him over to a neighboring town where he occasionally worked odd jobs. The general area was pretty mountainous, but the road to the next town actually cut through a long patch of flat land, so it was easy riding. Anyway, Grandpa was taking this long, lonesome road one day. It was in the middle of the summer, and the sun was bearing down on him, when suddenly he saw something up ahead. It was an old barn in one of the fields, but Grandpa had never seen it before. At first, he thought that someone must have finally bought the property and just built a barn over it. But as he got closer, he realized that it looked very old and run down, almost abandoned looking, like it had been there for years, just rotting away. But this made no sense. Grandpa went down this road frequently, and there had always been nothing but fields. Then, without warning, his horse stopped. Grandpa had been staring intently at the barn, so he was a little startled when it happened. He gave the ropes a bit of a shake to try and get him moving again. Red wouldn't budge. Grandpa hopped off and began to talk to his horse. He did this a lot, asking him what was wrong and telling him that he had to get to the next town. And as he was doing this, Grandpa heard a noise coming from the old barn. It was quiet at first, but it sounded like a human voice. Grandpa looked at the barn, straining his ears to listen. But by then, Red had started to snort. You know, the same way they do when horses are agitated. Grandpa couldn't hear anything over it, so he began to walk toward the barn. As he got closer, he could tell that it was definitely somebody crying, and that it was in a child's voice. He began to hurry forward because at first he thought someone was hurt, but at the last second he stopped himself, just a few feet from the entrance. He could hear the crying, plain as day, but he couldn't bring himself to go in for some reason. He felt a sense of danger that he couldn't fully explain. When Grandpa had been younger, he had been messing around in the forest one day when he suddenly felt the urge to go home. He raced back through the whole trees, thinking the whole way, there's trouble at home, although he didn't know why he felt this way. It's not important for this story what happened in that situation, but Grandpa told me that as he approached the barn, he felt the same type of feeling that he had felt way back in the forest. It was a very eerie, almost sixth sense that told him, don't move. Anyway, he stopped dead in his tracks, feeling afraid, but not sure why. He began to wonder why Red had acted so strange as they approached the barn. The whole time, there were these loud wails coming from the barn. And then, just like that, the crying stopped. It went from a full-blown howl to complete silence. The only thing Grandpa could hear was Red getting more and more agitated behind him, but Grandpa kept real still. He said he felt like that someone was watching him, and he felt frozen with fear. A very long, tense moment passed, until a huge gust of wind came blowing in so hard that it almost knocked Grandpa over. At that point, he gathered his wits and began to slowly walk backwards. But then he heard the crying over to his right. Grandpa froze again, but this time he turned his head slowly and looked toward the sound. But there was nothing there. He could hear it, plain as day, but there was nothing there. It was a few feet away and seemed to be coming from high up. It was like a tall, invisible person was crying, but with the voice of a child. Grandpa stared into the spot where the crying was coming from, and it began to get further and further away, growing quieter and quieter until it faded completely. Grandpa felt himself relax, and he headed back towards Red. Only Red was gone. After a while of looking for him, Grandpa just assumed that Red must have taken off back toward the house out of fear. He could go back and retrieve him, but that would mean he would be late for a job that he had to do in the next town. It wasn't much further that he had to go, so he figured he may as well just walk. So fast forward, Grandpa finishes the job. He was walking back home, tired and ready for bed. As he began to approach the area where he had seen the old barn, Grandpa grew nervous, thinking he'd see it again. But he didn't. The field was empty, just like it always had been. He was confused by this, obviously. He wondered what he had seen, and whether he was going nuts. But mainly, he was relieved that everything seemed to be normal, and that he continued his walk. The sun began to set, when suddenly Grandpa began to feel strange again, but he kept walking. But he felt as though someone was walking behind him. It sounded like footsteps, keeping perfect pace with him. He turned around, half expecting to see someone there, but he was always alone. As he walked, he continued to hear the footsteps. Grandpa was now wide awake and scared, but he said that the fears subsided all of a sudden, and he began to think about how thirsty he was from the long day at work. All he could think about was how bad that he wanted a drink of water. Off in the distance, in the field to his right, he could see a little stream shimmering in the moonlight. Without thinking, he walked off the road and began to head toward it. The part of the road he was on at this point was right before he entered a small forest, so Grandpa was moving toward the stream parallel with the tree line. As he got closer, he heard movement in the darkness of the trees. Grandpa said that this sound woke him up, like from out of a deep sleep. He instantly felt extremely groggy and wondered where the hell he was and what the hell he'd been doing. He slowly began to realize that he was standing out in the same field that he had seen the barn. He felt as though he had been led there somehow. He also realized that something big was in those trees, and it was coming right at him. He was about to run when he realized what the sound was. It was Red. The poor thing rushed out of the darkness, looking scared out of his wits, and that's when the fear came back, all at once. Grandpa suddenly felt like he was in real, mortal danger. Red was snorting and shaking like crazy. Grandpa quickly hopped on Red's back, and they hightailed it back to the road. The only problem was that the road traveled through the trees, and it was very dark. Grandpa was worried about what Red might do. Would he freeze again? Would he buck him off? He just held tight to the rope as Red barreled down the road, headed for home. At first, Grandpa could hear something behind them. Footsteps. Only now they were very loud. It was like someone was literally stomping with every step, but they kept going. The footsteps began to die down, and they made it home without much other problem. Back at the house, everyone stayed up waiting on my grandpa, and when he showed up, they could tell right away that something had happened. That side of my family is very close. Everyone tells each other everything, no matter how strange or how personal. So everyone believed my grandpa's story without question, but none of them knew what to make of it. Fast forward about a month, and Grandpa had heard about a guy who went missing in the area. He was kind of a vagrant, but well liked by most people. Just before he went missing, someone made him a hat, kind of like a homemade cap. Now my grandpa can't really verify this next part because he didn't see it firsthand, but he said it was told to him by someone that he knew well. This friend of my grandpa's was taking the same road to the next town when he saw the vagrant's hat lying off the side of the road. It was actually very near where my grandpa saw the old barn. When he went to go pick up the hat, he noticed footprints. It had rained steadily for a few days, and the vagrant had left clear footprints in the dirt, but they traveled off for a few feet and then vanished, like the guy had been plucked right up out of the ground. Like I said, it's kind of an unsatisfactory ending. I asked my grandpa what he thought it was, and he said that he could guess some type of evil spirit. After that happened, my great-grandma made my grandpa a special blanket that had some kind of special type of pattern sewn on it, supposedly protecting you from evil spirits. I also asked him if anyone else had ever claimed to see the barn, and he said that he had never heard anyone else ever bring it up, but that he thinks that he was just one of the lucky ones. For some reason, he was able to sense that something was off about the barn, and then Red showing up saved him a second time. He basically thought it was just unlikely that anyone else got that lucky. So, did any of those encounters stick out to you? If one did, let me know which one that it was. As always, if you've had one of your own that you would like to send into the channel, I have an email in the description below. Also down there is a PayPal and a Patreon if you would like to support the channel that way. And with that, I hope you have a Merry Christmas, a Happy Hanukkah, a Happy Holidays, whatever you want to celebrate. I hope it does great for you. And I will see you in the next one. Thank you for pulling up a stump with me. And I am pretty much over the cold that I had. It only took a few days, but it's just the sinuses. I feel otherwise completely fine, but this is always the last part that leaves. It takes forever for my sinuses to clear up. But anyways, I hope you have Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays, like I said, and I will see you in the next one. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please like and subscribe. Thank you for pulling up a stump with me, and thank you for watching.